Hello everyone. I'm going to talk about our literature review. So first off, our literature review is really to establish a purpose to our problem of practice. What we highlighted in our literature review is the importance of transition. So when we talked about the importance of transition, first what we looked at is we analyzed the actual definition of transition and what students went through in transitioning from elementary school into middle school. Afterwards, we talked about the implications of class misplacement. So that is extremely important because you can see differences with instructional content in various classes and the implications of tracking. So what classes a student can be put into in middle school can affect particular outcomes, in addition to having negative implications and social issues based on tracking. The school culture in which students transition into is also very important because if teachers aren't collaborating and there is a culture of isolation, then the students might not be as successful. And finally, we talked about staff capacity and the ability for teachers to have the knowledge in order to correctly place students into the transition process and be able to collaborate with former teachers in order to make the transition successful. Upon reflecting on our actual literature review process, it really became the most important part of actually establishing a process. Mackey and McVoy actually talk about the Boolean phrase, which our group really found extremely important, is what keywords were we actually searching in order to get the literature that we needed to support our POP and then lead us to the right places. What we did is we then organized all of the information and we found reoccurring themes and reoccurring authors, which really led us to actually organizing our literature review and then finding out where we go with our problem of practice afterwards. So we learned a lot about our topic in addition to really reinforcing an actual process to conduct a literature review. Next, I would like to talk about how we analyzed our problem. We analyzed our problem through the lens of Wagner's 4C's framework. The framework focuses on context, which is understanding global, state, and community realities and revisioning what all students now need to know, culture of classrooms, schools, and districts, conditions of learning and teaching for students and adults, and competencies of adults. All of these components contribute to improving teaching and learning. And as you can see, themes from our literature review emerge perfectly into our framework. So we used the actual framework to link the literature and specific context within the lens. Using this lens and writing up our problem analysis really helped us to dive deeper into our problem. Specifically, when we looked at the context, we really realized that the absence of formal transition policies and procedure guidelines had so many different implications on the actual organization. How student data assessment was actually used and what was done with that information when it was taken. We also then analyzed the culture and looking at the culture of isolation, really how it impacted some of the difficulties within the transition process and how although teachers might have collaboration within their schools, the lack of collaboration across districts really also impacted the students in a negative way. Looking at conditions, we were really focusing on actual architecture and the infrastructure around student learning. So the realization that there was no plan really came out during this particular aspect in saying, how can teachers be held responsible for negative transitions for students if there is no plan in place? And that's something that we really developed even more through our literature review and then further through our framework analysis to say that a plan needed to be in place and that structure needed to be created and changed. Corresponding with that, looking at the competencies and what staff is able to accomplish and do in order to fulfill that plan and what other knowledge they needed in order to be successful.